Hi, I'm Lynda Matt.
Hi, Lynda.
I'm Felecia, Watkin. Today we presented on knowledge translation and particularly our project, which was about knowledge translation, the Torres Strait, the impact of climate change on our communities.
Somebody on Twitter said it was knowledge translation to mobilise that you presented on, because you were talking about a very live issue there, yeah?
Yeah, so when we're talking about mobilise, how do we use that knowledge to actually bring about change in our communities? How do we get our communities to, as we say, we've got a framework for thinking about this is know the risk, own the risk and flip the risk. Our communities know that climate change is very real and is impacting on their communities in a very real and very dramatic way, almost on an annual basis. So there's no turning back climate change and environmental devastation, but how do we own that? How do we motivate our communities to have agency, to be able to use both their own knowledge, our own experiential knowledge, our traditional knowledge, our cultural knowledge, and how do we use that together with research knowledge or scientific evidence about climate change to make a real difference in terms of building strength and resilience in our communities, social capital in our communities, how do we bring about strengthening change for our communities to think about how do we respond to issues such as climate change.
And Lynda, how did you go about doing that then?
Well, from the start to the finish, well, not really finish, but from the start we involved our community members, both Torres Strait Islander organisations and people on the mainland, as well as Torres Strait Islanders in the islands, and got them to take some ownership on some of the responsibilities of climate change and things that are happening to their own communities, to look at how we could mobilise knowledge and bridging that gap between traditional experiential knowledge with scientific research knowledge. And we did that through basically looking at ways of getting our key messages through storytelling, through dance, through activities such as the kayak event in Cairns last year.
So, could you say what happened there?
Yeah, we had we put on a little kind of like what do you call it, a play or a performance, an art performance?
Multimedia, multimodal performance.
Yes,
we had traditional media, there was traditional song,
traditional dance.
But then it also sort of had a contemporary element
That's
too,
right.
didn't it, at the end?
Yeah, very futuristic.
Yes.
Because the setting was in 2050.
Yes.
50?
Yeah. And he was so the premise was he was
Time Lord.
The elder was a Time Lord,
yeah.
and he came back from the future to warn our communities in the present day about what was to come, wasn't it? That our islands were sinking.
You said you asked specific questions. You came up with some particular questions to look at around ownership, etc. What are those questions, and how do they? That is knowledge translation, really.
You do have to ask questions about who is your audience. When is what is the time frame or the issue at hand, and also to ask questions of why, and for what purpose are you using the knowledge. But there's also questions that we always ask, how are you going to do that? So what's your methods? And as Lynda was talking about, bringing together elders and community people into the same space as researchers to co-design. It's a nice research term, but really it's the way that we've always worked together, traditionally and culturally, is that you have different generations and of people coming together that have different levels of knowledge or different access to knowledge or custodians of knowledge. So they're the ways that we deal with the knowledge space anyway, but bringing people into the university space, into that sort of research institutional space was something that was new. So the how was very important in terms of how we bring about knowledge mobilisation and drawing on, as you were saying, experiential knowledge, the knowledge that we have as Torres Torres Strait Islanders and bringing it together with the research or knowledge that we have that we've acquired through research in our own Western education, if you like.
And you referred briefly to it just before, but you had a mantra around flipping.
Yes.
Can you go through that?
Yeah, so we've collective a framework for thinking about a whole range of ways to approach problem solving and challenges, and in this case that we applied it as a tool to think through our approach to knowledge mobilisation and how we would address the issue of climate change. So in this particular case, know the risk. Well, our communities already know the risk because they're living with flooding and seasonal changes and unpredictable weather patterns. So we know the risk. The own the risk is somewhat of a challenge in terms of different levels of access to knowledge and information in order for us to own and accept this is happening, and therefore what are we going to do about it?
So
what are we going to do about it? And that comes in with the flipping, so that's the last part of it. So once we own the challenges being ours and not a challenge that's represented or presented to the government to fix on our behalf, we've got to develop up solutions and strategies.
And we've got to get everyone involved, on every level, whether it's school children or families, the community, to get them to well, they know it, but to own it, I guess, before they can decide about, what are we going to do about it, and how we're going to flip it.
Yeah. So we can't get to the flip until you own, and that's a key part of knowledge translation is how do you facilitate that ownership, and how do we collectively do it together? So it's not like our communities have to own it; we have to own it as a whole,
as a collective.
And what about the ownership of policymakers and politicians and things like that? I mean, where Labor put out their climate change policy yesterday, I believe. Where's their ownership fit in all this for you?
Yeah, so I think that we've, in our experience, the geographical disparity of where policy around climate change is actually being developed and discussed down south is so far removed from where our people are, just in terms of the geography and the distance, but also in terms of the way that people talk about climate change. So climate change and environmental management is focused down on the mainland around, what do we do around recycling and what do we do around plastic bags? And so, which are very important issues. I'm not dismissing that, but our climate change is our responses to that are so immediate in terms of its flooding our houses. It may mean forced migration of our people. It may mean forced disconnection to our home islands, and that impacts the thousands, tens of thousands of us that live away from our home islands, because then we've got nowhere to go back home. So we're talking about something that impacts us immediately, and also the immediate impact on generations to come. So there is in terms of the ownership, I don't know whether our people, correct me if I'm wrong, Lynda, actually are really buying into the broader discussions around climate change policies and emissions and carbon taxes and emissions trading and all the rest of it, and renewable energy and sources, because
they're flat out living.
They're just flat out living.
You know what I mean? They're just
they might not have homes next year.
That's right. Their loved ones, the cemeteries are sinking.
The cemeteries just get destroyed. So that connection to your ancestors and deceased is really important. And
that's right.
Their graves are being overrun. So that's just my comment on just that disconnection. So therefore, going back to that question about ownership, and then it's hard for people to own then what's happening on a policy level if they don't identify with the range of solutions or strategies that are being adopted in policy that seem so far removed from where they are both in a metaphorical sense, a cultural sense, and also in a geographic sense.
So you can say then where their ownership is then at this point in the research, and then where you'll go from here?
Yeah, I think we've sort of, we're not the only ones, that are having this discussion, because our communities are engaged in this discussion as well. So I think would be fair to say, a work in progress in terms of the ownership.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep,
So that
absolutely.
we've got, you've certainly got some very committed and energetic people in the communities that are really trying to highlight this issue using social media as a platform. So last year when the floods were happening, you saw people were very active on social media trying to get their message out. So I think that the ownership is there. What we're trying to provide is some additional tools that people can use, and that research information is very important, because they've done all of the CSIRO and other scientific institutions have done the modelling on expected rising sea levels, etc. But all that information is sitting on reports on someone's shelves. If you can equip people with that information, if you equip people with that information and provide them with tools and platforms in which they can get their message out, but also that they can use that knowledge. That's what we're saying.
Because that's the other thing. You can provide that information, but it's not written in a way that's understandable for people on the ground. So I think that was the whole idea of our project. I think by doing it through storytelling and dance-based performance and stuff like that, game-based, to get the message through on a level that they can actually understand, and then it'd be more accessible to them.
Yeah.
And you said you've seen really strong impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've, in all of the activities, how do you know that any of this is working?
Right.
So you can do a nice performance and you can do games based, but how do you know that any of that message is getting across? And that's the important thing about ownership. How could you ever measure if there's a scale to which people were owning something more or less, depending on whatever intervention or strategy you were putting in place? So you've got to measure. You've got to. So we always get feedback. Yeah. Even today we got feedback as to what people thought about it, what messages, and we specifically asked what message that people thought they got from the performance, and also using some innovative ways to get that information. So, Lynda, you set up the SMS.
I set up an SMS messaging system so that people didn't have to write a comment, just provide us with an A, B, C, or D. And then we had some of our team members go through the crowd with their mobile phones and do some voice drops on what they thought, what sort of message they got from it. When I'm saying some of the members in the crowd, we went to our own people to see if they got the message, because they're actually the people that we really also wanted the message to come strongly through, because they're the people that are suffering, or their families, in the communities.
And are you able to keep this work going?
Well, that's partly why we're giving out cards today, because we're hoping that, people might come up with some ideas to help us, as a collective, work out how we could continue to do this sort of work and keep it going. Because as you know, our funding will stop.
That's right.
Yeah.
Any other takeaways on knowledge translation in general from today and from your work?
I think this idea of engaging the community seems to be a common theme that we talk about, so that knowledge translation is often thought about something you do at the end of a project, and that it's often thought about it in terms of communication of your research findings or your research results, or dissemination of what we found as researchers. And we're saying, and part of our model, we're applying the whole no own and flip
from the start
from on ours, because we're saying we're going to flip that model. We're going to flip that model so that it's not just about us telling you as researchers what we found. You as the users of knowledge, our communities as users of that knowledge, need to be part of that process in the very beginning.
That's
I remember
right.
you were saying, Lynda, from the very beginning, they're part of that discussion about this knowledge that we're co-creating. What's the story, and not only what is the story, but how are we going to tell that story when we get to the other end? And we're going to conceptualize that with our communities and our people from the very beginning. And I guess that's an important takeaway message for us, because even our own research fraternity, our colleagues, we always just think about that at the end, and we're trying to say, let's flip that model. Let's not think about community as an afterthought. Let's get them in the front end and all the way through, you were saying, from beginning
and
to
we included them before we even started the project. We brought people in from the community. We whiteboarded what they thought was the most, important priority for them as a community, as Torres Strait Islanders, both on the mainland and Torres Straits, and climate change come up. And then we decided, so we just didn't pick our project out of the hat. We got them involved from the start to tell us.
What others had come up as well, but that one resonated, or was that just resonated?
Well, it resonated, but at that time I think there was a lot of floods happening and a lot of rain and high tides and, the moon and the stars, that just, things were just happening in the Torres Straits, and people's lives were at risk, and their homes, their loved ones. People on the mainland was worried they couldn't go home.
Where, with working with the community, did something shift for you? Was there something that surprised you?
Well, I think, when we say working with the community, it's, there are just lots of challenges, because the ways that funding bodies and the way that institutions have set up certain processes and guidelines, trying to do, it makes doing community engagement very challenging and very difficult. So, because it's a lot of hoops that you've got to jump through. There's lots of justification on how and where you're spending the money, and sort of going outside of the box.
Yeah, it didn't look like research to them.
Didn't look like research.
You know what I mean?
Doesn't look legitimate. You're doing a performance at an Indigenous art fair.
Bringing games in.
You're bringing games in, and so what we also hope from the project we've done and talking to others, is that we, I don't want to say legitimise, but certainly give credibility to the type of creative, innovative spaces that are familiar to us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but we've got to bring those into the institutional space. So, and I don't think that it's any coincidence that the Lowitja Institute, which is Indigenous-led funding body, is I guess supportive of thinking about creative ways to do knowledge translation. And so I think the challenge is that outside of these Indigenous-led spaces, that we're moving into other areas within the research space, where we say, this is an important and significant form of doing research.
That's right.
That is beneficial to our communities, and that's very important.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much.